My guest today comes to us from a faraway land known as Utah, an author of several books including Ancient Hieroglyphs of the West, Forbidden Histories of the West, Nephite North, Treasures of Utah, and Forbidden Histories of the Americas. He first caught my attention with the topic of Jesse James when I came across his discussions on Ian Bell's BitChute channel. Most of us claim to have a good and basic idea of whom Jesse James was, a typical flashy, bank-robbing cowboy criminal of 19th century America. But have you ever pondered the reality of this and these narratives? Perhaps you were like me and didn't have any idea or even how to get started on this topic. Most people don't realize how interesting the Wild West in 19th century America truly is, which is partly why the Wild West culture is so beloved by people the world around. Now it's my pleasure to introduce my guest for this evening's discussion, author Daniel Lowe. Daniel, how you doing out there? How you holding up?
Doing all right, all things considering.
You're out there in Utah?
Yeah.
Northern Utah.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Uinta Basin.
Ski country, from my understanding. I have family that's from Logan, Utah, and my grandpa taught at Utah State.
My wife has family up in Cache Valley.
Wonderful. That's beautiful. It's beautiful. But topic of today is Jesse James. And, I listened to a conversation you had with a Mr. Terry a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago. And It really caught my attention. And it tied a lot of loose ends together, considering my background and my interest through my family. And I really think you have something here with this, and I got to ask, what got you interested and started in the topic of Jesse James?
Well, it actually started a long time ago, but about 7 years ago, a friend of mine sent me a book, and he said, Dan, I know your abilities to read through the lines, read between the lines, and to assess various mysteries and see things from a perspective that many don't think to look. And I would like you to read this book, and I would like your take on whether you think the book is accurate, or is it a made-up story? Is it, the authenticity of it? And I says, that sounds like fun. I said, what is it? And he said, Jesse James. It's called Jesse James was one of his names. And I thought, well, this sounds fun. So I took it upon myself, and it's now one of my fastest growing files.
And that was by Dale Schrader, correct?
Yes.
Yes, Dale Schrader.
Nicknamed the Black Book.
And that remake, or that cover of that book, or the 2020 edition, is for sale on your website too, correct?
Yeah, that's a reprint that I did because we couldn't find. They were anywhere from $500 to $1,000, and we just couldn't find a copy. And I thought, well, you know what? I think I'm going to reproduce it. So I did my due diligence and decided to reproduce it.
Nice, very good. And tell us a little bit more about your website before we jump in here.
My website was more of an outlet for me to share the research that I do, and it covers several different areas, but in a way that would be difficult for me to explain. They're actually all connected, but it goes from Native American petroglyphs to various religions, pretty much any unresolved mystery.
Mm-hmm. And people sometimes will mistake you for a treasure hunter, which is incorrect, right?
Well, I would have to say it is incorrect, but if you were to see what I do, yeah. I would even argue.
You would argue what?
I would argue that I'm a treasure hunter.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't hear that. You skipped out at that point. I was waiting on that response, that part. I'll let that out. No problem. Okay. Yeah, I feel like with your line of work and what you're researching, treasure just comes naturally, and it's not necessarily treasure as much as it is, you know, uh, gold shipments on trains, and stuff like that, and
Yeah,
Roman mines and stuff like this.
yeah.
It just comes naturally. It's a cherry
To
on
me,
top to your
to
work.
me, it's all treasure in one way or another.
Hmm. Yes, yes. And with Jesse James, you know, I was raised in Kansas City. I'm here in Eastern Kansas. We never got into the Jesse James topic, but it's pretty much stapled into everyone's mind that he was killed up in St. Joe, which is about 45 minutes to an hour's worth north of Kansas City. Everyone is under the impression that Jesse James was killed in 1882 by good old Bob Ford, and it is undeniable, supposedly. And you know, how does that sit? That doesn't sit well with you, though. You've come across things in your time in those 7 years
Well,
that.
I didn't know one way or the other when I started reading the book and following up on things and checking into what other people are saying. I mean, you can't just read the book and stick with what that book says. You have to see what everybody's saying. What does Wikipedia say? What do the academics say? What are various other people claiming? And you have to suck it all in, and then you got to sort through it and use your common sense and various evidences to validate one or the other. One of the most important things to me was to identify what he actually looks like. Because I knew photos would come into play. And I guess I kind of got lucky there, because when I finally decided upon what was a valid photo of Jesse James based upon the evidences to support it, he actually looks a lot like my older brother.
Huh, I see. Yeah, and people commonly mistake Jesse's pictures with his older brother or Frank James or other Jesse Jameses. Correct? Like
Well,
it's they.
Sylvester Franklin James is Jesse's brother, not Alexander Frank James. Alexander Frank James is the brother to Jesse Robert James. They are the sons of Zerelda.
And Zerelda was his Jesse James, the main Jesse James we're talking about's aunt.
Yes, correct.
Yes,
It
and
was his
people
dad's sister.
people mistakenly think that sometimes that Jesse James married his cousin or was
Right.
married Zerelda, which is a mistake.
Well, there were two Zereldas. There's Aunt Zerelda, and then there's Zerelda Mims. But no, he was never married to her. And in fact, Jesse Robert James was never married to her either. Keep in mind, there are four Jesse Jameses of the same family.
Okay, so
Two
yeah,
of them really don't play any part.
so before you can even start to look into Jesse James, you have to really confirm who he is. You have to dig just to find and confirm pictures of who he is. It's not as
Exactly.
certain. And so yeah, and where was Jesse James born? There's no conflict of interest with that. He was
The only thing that I have pulled up, and I could be mistaken because there's a whole lot to remember.
sure.
And I am a little bit rusty. I've been sidetracked for the past couple months due to good weather. But Kentucky born, Jesse and Frank, the two that we would be interested in, those are both Kentucky born. Jesse Robert James and Alexander Franklin James were born in Missouri.
Okay. Kentucky born, but that didn't stop Jesse James from fighting for the Confederacy in the Civil War.
No.
No, not at all. And he was a prominent member of the Confederate Underground.
Absolutely. If you understand who his father was, and I'm trying to recall the name here real quick, I knew I should have a list of names right here in front of me because
That's one of the
sometimes,
names I don't have, is his father.
I'll have it here in just a sec. I've actually got the uh, website pulled up in front of me,
Okay.
but I didn't have it situated very well on my screen, so.
Robert James? Robert S. James?
No, I think it's George.
That's funny. That's
And
that's the first result Google brought up, is a Robert S. James. I'm
it
not saying
almost
you're wrong. That's just Google and
it almost
mistaken
popped
identities of
into
the
my
James
head.
family.
George Struthers James. George Struther without an S. James. Does that name ring a bell?
It does not to me, not personally, no.
He was the first man to order or fire a shot upon Fort Sumter.
That's right. Yeah, he was among those. Okay, wow.
Now, if you go read what the academics say about him and what history says, they'll tell you that he was killed in battle, blah blah blah. But yet, I'm here to tell you that he lived well into. Let's see, this photo was taken in 1920, and I'm looking at an old picture of George Strother James. His Jesse's mother, Molly Dalton, standing behind him. And we have Jesse James, and we have Myra Bell also in this photo. The people of Hereford, Texas, have no idea how lucky they are.
Yeah, that's a big old James family reunion picture, sounds like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he lived there for 25 years at least, under the name of Captain Harrison Trow, the same man who was credited for identifying the dead body of Jesse James.
In St. Joseph in 1882. And
Yes.
Harrison Trow was, after reading your content, was sent by Jesse James's personal friend. What's his name? I'm sorry, Governor Crittenden.
I'm going to have you repeat that.
And sorry, okay, no problem. And Mr. Trow was sent out to confirm the dead body of Jesse James, quote unquote, by Governor Crittenden.
Well, that's what history says, but the interesting thing is how did Captain Harrison Trow just happen to be in the neighborhood within 15, 20 minutes of the murder?
Maybe it was a lucky coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, did they have some really good cell phones back then and forms of travel we are unaware of? How did Governor Crittenden get in touch with Captain Harrison Trow to take over the investigation? He even got there 15 minutes before the sheriffs got there, and they were an hour away in total.
Jeez. And Harrison Trow, excuse me, Jesse James and Governor Crittenden of Missouri, were secretly friends and allies behind closed doors.
Yes, they were, according to the book, they were school chums, and I would imagine that's something that could probably be looked up. It just wasn't one of the important things for me. I had enough to,
Sure.
with that and common sense, to take his word for it.
And but in reality, this body that they identified wasn't Jesse James at all. It was a Mr. Bigelow, Charlie Bigelow.
Charlie Bigelow, who was one of Jesse's cousins.
Huh. And he was causing all sorts of problems.
Yeah, basically, he was going around robbing everybody and anybody, and using the name Jesse James, taking credit for all this, and it was giving Jesse a bad name.
Yep. And it wasn't even Jesse. I mean, it was Jesse who organized Charlie Bigelow to be shot and then staged for Jesse, but it ultimately ended up being Jesse's best friend throughout his life, who was Mr. John Trammell, who took out Mr. Bigelow's two other brothers.
He's the one that took out the other two.
Yeah. And we'll cover more about Mr. Trammell later.
Yeah, John was an incredible man.
Yes. Ultimately lived to be 121, if my memory serves right.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. And but back to Jesse in the Civil War. He fought for the Confederacy, definitely knee deep in the Confederate underground, very talented and recognized for his talents to essentially a special operatives person. Is that right?
Yes, yes. I like to compare him to James Bond.
Yeah, for the South. Yeah, James Bond of the South.
Yeah, one of the secrets is to understand what the Civil War was really all about, not what the victor in war has indoctrinated us with.
Yes, and my generation, I'm 30. My generation mostly believes that it was done over slavery, and there's a lot of nonsense that they'll throw our way to try and prove that. But yeah, you can't really understand Jesse James's background if you don't understand the Civil War, really.
Exactly, and what it was about.
What exactly it was about.
I personally found it hard to believe that the Southern people would rather sit there and watch their women and children boarded up in a church and burned alive rather than give up their slaves.
Yeah, that something doesn't sound too correct. And the more, it wasn't about slavery at all. And when those
Well,
seven,
it was, but it wasn't.
it
It
was,
was
but
actually
wasn't.
about
Yeah,
creating slavery.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I think you've done your homework.
yeah. It wasn't. It was everyone's a slave at this point, and yeah, it was a disaster. And Jesse James, yeah, it was his involvement with. Let me see. I'm going down the list here. He made friends and allies with not only former slaves but Native American Indians, and he was highly involved with Native American Indian tribes, including the Sioux. Knew a couple of Native American Indian languages. Correct?
Oh, the Indians, the Mexicans, and the people from Africa, they loved him.
Yeah, and he was all over. Made lots of good allies. He lots of affidavits attesting to his.
Oh yeah, we haven't seen the half of the affidavits.
Yeah, yeah, and I read from your website that two of his most trusted operatives were Sioux Indians.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
he
yeah,
was married to a Sioux as well, part of the job.
yeah. And so I got to stay on track here. I forget. So the Civil War ends. Jesse James is still fighting. He lives through the Civil War. The Civil War, ends with the Union victory. Unfortunately, what happens to Jesse from there? Where does he go? What does he have to do?
Well,
Who does he work for?
Jesse benefited extensively from his position. One of his jobs, in fact, his main job was basically to seek out the weaknesses of the North and hit them at every opportunity. And one of those was to attack their finances. And this is why he went after banks and train robberies that were carrying bank payrolls or federal payrolls, etc., the North payroll. If a stagecoach was carrying something with, I don't know the names of the banks back then, but today it would be Wells Fargo, Chase Bank. Those are the ones he'd hit because they are connected to the world bankers.
Yeah. And so that's where a lot of these are misunderstandings of him are, stem from that he wasn't robbing innocent people, old ladies in carriages, grocery stores, and
Exactly.
he was robbing Union and Northern bankers, their lifeline there.
Oh, I've even come across descendants of Jesse James, and half the family is embarrassed as hell to even admit it, and the other half is excited as hell.
Yeah. Yep. It's a hit or miss. Some people can handle it, some people can't. And
I wish I was related to him.
yeah, I find myself happy that I'm related to significantly important people in history, good or bad. And
Yeah.
we'll cover that as I'm later, as I'm related to John Wilkes Booth. But we'll cover that in the future, and he's relevant here, and we'll cover that eventually. But it's awesome to know that your family had something to do with history. But
Oh, yeah.
so he's sent out. He starts a series of aliases, and which one of his most famous aliases was William A. Clark, correct? A
Correct.
copper king in Montana, senator.
Yes. Senator William A. Clark. I'll tell you, when I first heard it, it was like, oh, I don't know about that. And I probably spent weeks comparing William A. Clark's photos with Jesse James, and it finally dawned on me that I'm comparing oranges to apples here. This is not Jesse James. I'm not saying that he wasn't William A. Clark, but the photos is not Jesse James. And I come to find out later that is true. It's Carl O. Clark. I paid double
Paid double for.
Jesse.
Okay.
There's similarities in their appearance, and it very well could have gone that way if this is Jesse. But it's not. He's posing as Jesse James, posing as William A. Clark. He was a stand-in.
Okay. So that Copper King, that wasn't Jesse James.
The guy that you see in the photos, no. But the Copper King, yes, that's him.
Oh, okay. Okay. My mistake. Sorry about that.
In other words, Carlo Clark would probably give old Jesse a call. How they communicated, I don't know. But Carl pretty much took care of business while he was away. He stood in for photos, and Jesse was known, or should I say, William A. Clark was known for not showing up for sessions, and being a very unreliable individual, and it's because he had a busy life going on.
Yeah.
Jesse come out of the Civil War as a very wealthy man, and it wasn't from what they stole from the Union and from the North. It was there was a lot of other things that went along with this.
Okay. And was it after the William A. Clark alias was killed off that he went to Idaho?
Where? No, Idaho was much earlier on. He killed off his two primary aliases in 1925, and that would be Captain Harrison Trow and William A. Clark.
Okay. Okay, but I must be mistaken on my timeline, because after he left Idaho, he was sent to Colorado, to Granite, Colorado, for the 62 tons of gold dust, a shipment. This is a Federal Reserve train.
Right, and that's something that I figured out by reading between the lines and matching the dates up. According to the ancestors in Idaho, they were under the impression that he said he was going to California to find his gold.
Yeah.
But he never come back. And looking at the time frames and so forth, Jesse left with a child on the way, and there's no way he could have known about it. In fact, I don't think she knew she was pregnant when Jesse left.
I see. And see, that was William Cole and Susan Palmer, right?
Yes.
And that was his one of his wives, because Jesse James had several wives. It was part of his job, and that was while he went out to Idaho. And did he join the Mormon Church out there?
Twice.
And he assisted the Mormons in Canada with a temple building?
Yeah, tabernacle, if I recall. That he actually participated in building a tabernacle up there. And I've got evidence of him being in Manti and all up and down through Salt Lake City. He used to own one of the Salt Lake newspapers, his company, William A. Clark.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
And I found some evidence that he more than likely was involved in a power company down in St. George, Utah, by the name of Dixie Power. Gee, I wonder where that name come from.
uh, and yeah, very good. And so, and what I got the impression of after reading your work was that Jesse always took care of his young, and so when he left Susan Palmer for Colorado, he had no idea she was pregnant. And
No, he couldn't have.
okay, okay, yeah, yeah, and
That was a long process. I still haven't filled in all the blanks, but that was to intercept a gold shipment of 66 tons of nuggets and flour. Well, I don't know if you'd call it flour gold, but placer gold. And
okay.
I don't think they left it in Colorado. I think they loaded it on a train and took it somewhere else.
Really?
Yeah, eventually I mean, you got to up where they supposedly attacked this wagon train that was on its way to Denver. um, Near the spot where this occurred, there's a pretty well-known mine. And supposedly they built the railroad up to that mine for the purpose of mining. But yet, I go look at it and I can't even see the mine dumps. It's like, what mining were they doing? Or was there another purpose they built that railroad?
You think it was a KGC underground location?
Without a doubt. I mean, would $66 million in those, or excuse me, not 66 million, someone would have to do the math on this. 66 tons of gold. Would that be worth building a railroad up there to retrieve it and move it someplace a little easier to get to rather than 13,000 feet?
Yeah. And you when across the timetable of your research, you have evidence of Jesse James being all over the United States, not just in Kentucky to Georgia to
Right.
Utah. You got him going all the way to California, Canada, Idaho, even Mexico.
Primarily here in the West, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada. I mean, the the stories that I haven't resolved yet, those are just as interesting as any other story that I have. Um, and I wish I could do this full time. I mean, it's absolutely a passion,
Mm-hmm.
but things never work out the way you want them to, and so you have to deal with it.
Yeah, I hear that. And Jesse James apparently assisted Pancho Villa and had something to do with Emperor Maximilian. And he had, I remember listening to you. You mentioned something about Pancho Villa. Did you want to enlighten us on that?
Well, I can't tell you too much more than what you might already know. He was trying to help Pancho Villa in his quest, and of course they have him being killed somewhere just south of the border. I can't remember where. And in reality, Pancho Villa lived out the rest of his life up in New Mexico. Same thing happened with Maximilian. They'll tell you, and the story of Maximilian, I got to admit, it's pretty incredible. It is difficult to believe, but there's a lot of things that surfaced later that tells me it was absolutely the truth. The academics will tell you that he was shot by a firing squad down in Mexico. You really got to read that part. It's interesting. But he made it up to Texas. had a limp for the rest of his life because of it. But he was so grateful to Jesse James that he gave him his personal treasure. Jesse went overseas and went and picked up his wife, left. In fact, you can compare photos. I thought this was kind of interesting. Charlotta. You can compare photos prior to all of this happening to photos after this happening. And I personally, I don't know if everybody can, but I can tell they're not the same woman. They went overseas and they found a look-alike, made her an offer. She took it, and she lived out the rest of her life as Charlotta.
And
While
wasn't
the real one came back here and lived out her life with Maximilian.
and wasn't so Maximilian lived under the protection of the Texans for the rest of his life, and or
The organization, as long as he needed it, yeah. That's
okay,
how Jesse came out of the war. That's one of the many ways that Jesse came out of the war as a multimillionaire.
okay, wow, what a story! That could be its own episode and discussion within itself. I tell you what, um, yeah, Maximilian, that's very interesting, very
What's
interesting. And
what's the White Sands treasure called? I can't remember.
the White Sands treasure.
Yeah, it's Victoria Peak treasure.
Can't say I'm familiar.
Well, interestingly enough, the man who found it, and I can't recall his name off the top of my head, some of the items that he listed that he saw in there, one of them was a trunk, and it said Carlotta's things. And there was a crown. There was a crown in there that I bet you could still be identified to this day. I've got a picture of it.
Wasn't one of these foreign ladies that was married to someone that had to do something that Jesse James was involved with, Lawrence of Arabia's daughter?
Oh, that was it was either Butch Cassidy or Sundance, and Sundance wasn't who everybody thinks he was either. I want to say it was Sundance that hooked up with Lawrence Arabia's daughter.
Huh.
And lived up in Washington for quite some time. He died, if the story's true, he died in Cut Bank, Montana, but I don't think he was buried there.
I see. Okay. And yeah, there's a lot to Jesse James that goes deeper and deeper and deeper than just his aliases and his involvement with KGB.
They could make a movie about this and then make 10 more.
He was a literal equivalent to that times of a 007. He wasn't just of a James Bond. As cliche as that sounds to listeners, of course, but that's a real way of comparing him. Wow. So now we're here. He's back in Colorado. When does he eventually turn into Jim Reed and move down to Hereford, Texas?
I don't think he ever turned into Jim Reed. I think that's an assumption on several different parties. I have the photo that they claim is Jim Reed and Myra Bell. And I half agree. It's absolutely Myra Bell. And the man in the photo is not Jim Reed, it's Jesse James. And I believe that photo was taken the same time as the marriage record that you can find of Missouri Ann and Harrison Trow getting married.
And you said there's a picture of that in a museum in Hereford, Texas?
Well, no, it's not in a museum. It's a picture that circulates around the internet, but everybody says, oh, that's, they either say Jim Reed or Bruce Younger. And no, she was never married to Bruce Younger either. It might have been an alias he used at one time. Jim Reed might have been an alias he used at one time. But when they got married, in that photo, he was using the name Harrison Trow, and Myra Bell was using the name Missouri Ann. That's the name she died under.
I see. Okay. And when we mentioned earlier that Jesse James had a lot of connections with a lot of Native, not just one or two Native American reservoir groups. It was. Tell us a little bit more about his connections with the Native Americans specifically. Who did he have that, who did he care most about in terms of the Native Americans? And who did he communicate and work most with? Who did he get along with?
Well, pretty much got along with any of the Native Americans, but I'd have to say the Sioux Indians were some of his favorites. There's story after story of his dealings with the African slaves, the Mexican people, the various tribes, but I would have to say one of his favorites was the Sioux Indians. He was married to a Sioux, Margaret Wabasha. I know her Indian name too, but there's no way in hell I can find it right now or say it.
Yeah, and tell us more, because didn't he have a son who was very
Yes.
important to this whole thing?
They had a son with Margaret. He had a son with Margaret Wabasha, and his name was Joe Jesse. And backing up, where were we? Margaret Wabasha. They had a son. His name was Joe Jesse. Joe Jesse is the father of Jesse James III, or Lee Hawk. And Lee Hawk is the one primarily responsible for feeding the information to Dale Schrader.
Yes, and that's all the black. That's Jesse James was one of his names, and wasn't Lee Hawk responsible for a lot of the information in the Black Book as well?
Yeah, he's the primary source that fed the information to Dale Schrader.
Yep.
It might help to understand that, Jesse in his older years was taken care of by his grandson. He spent a lot of time with him, and according to him, Jesse related an awful lot of secrets. There were some things that he could not because he was afraid that some of the people that could be implicated were still living. I mean, good hell, he lived to be 107, 105. Can't remember. I don't know what it is, why these people live so damn long, but one of I don't just sit down and read. I don't just look at old newspapers and old books and look at 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, I reach out to these people. I try to find descendants of Jesse James, possible descendants, and I quiz them and I ask them for information, photographs, whatever, anything that can help put this puzzle together. Because one of the main things that I love about this and that keeps me going is to try to figure out the absolute genealogy of Jesse James. I had a lady reach out to me, and she said that it's been in her family for quite some time that they are direct descendants of Jesse James. And I got to admit, I thought, no, brother, rolled my eyes. And she said she had a letter that I'd probably be interested in reading. And I said, well, I'd like to see it. And she says, I have a picture also. And she said, would you like to see that? And I said, yes, I would. Even though I've looked at hundreds of photos of people that absolutely believe their grandfather or great-grandfather, and some of them pound the internet pretty hard. And they're convinced that he was Jesse James. And so I've looked at an awful lot of photos. Well, I get this email. She sends the letter, and I read the letter, and it's Lee Hawk writing a letter to his cousin, telling him that Grandpa has passed away. And I thought that was pretty damn interesting. That's given the story some credibility, because I've done enough research at that point where I know that Lee Hawk was more than likely who he said he was. and the events he speaks of are more than likely true. I haven't proven everything. I haven't disproved anything, but I proved a lot.
Yeah.
And then I opened up the email when she sent the photo, and I remember rolling my eyes, thinking, "No, here we go again." And then something just stopped me dead in my tracks, and I looked at it, and I looked a little harder, and oh my God, that's Jesse James and Sylvester Franklin James, his brother. There's no question. You can see it. Go to the blog site, look at the photo comparisons.
Yeah. Yeah.
That just blew me away. And I want that photo. I've been negotiating with this young lady for quite some time, and I really want it, or a professional copy.
Yeah. So that letter would have had to been from his death around 1951 and the 50s. So and Jesse did.
The photo she sent me was from about 1895, 96, because the photo down at the bottom had the photographer's name on it, which I won't release at this point because there may be another copy. Sure. And he only operated for 2 years.
Wow. And but tell us all a little bit going into kind of connecting the second half of Jesse's life from 19, because he was robbing federal trains and trying to hurt the bankers really where it hurt him the most, up until roughly, working for the KGC, which is the the Knights of the Golden Circle and the Confederate Underground. Tell us, 1900 to his death in the 1950s. Tell us a little bit more about what he did going into the 1900s. I mean,
well, in the year of 1900, that's when he moved to Hereford, Texas. He bought up can you say shitload?
8,000 acres, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, 8,000 that we know of under his name, Harrison Trow. I suspect that land went way down into Bottomless Lake area in New Mexico, because that's where one of the photos was found, is in an old cabin at Bottomless Lake. But yeah, he bought up an awful lot of land. I'm still trying to figure out where his estate was. And I think he brought 4 of his kids with him, and they probably would have been in their upper teens. In fact, that photo from Hereford, Texas was taken at what I would say is his suspect son's house, and I'm trying to remember what his name was. Black, Phineas Bushrod Black. And pretty much anybody in Hereford would know who he is. I mean, they've turned his house into a museum, and they have no idea. I'm pretty sure Jesse's older kids knew who he was. I don't think any of his his grandkids, or possibly even other grandchildren, probably never knew.
I see.
I think that's why they're just not interested.
In Hereford, Texas. So he moved to Hereford, Texas before or after he changed his name and used the alias of Roy Sibley to Copper Creek, Arizona, where he built the mansion in the mountains?
Now, I'm not positive he was Roy Sibley. That's a theory.
Okay.
It makes sense to me. It's the same thing that Jesse would have done, but there very well could have been, I don't know, it could be one of those coincidences that I don't believe in. The mail clerk there was, I can't remember the name she was using, but I think it was Myra.
It was Belle. Wife's name was Belle. And she was the
Belle. It just sounds too much like Jesse, and it was right in the heart of a heavy mining area. I think it was him.
It's true. I hear you. Didn't you mention William A?
And Sibley was a name that he was very familiar with in the Civil War.
How was it? And he got most of his connections with the railroad and utilities when he was using the William A. Clark alias,
Yeah.
and
Well,
he owned most of those industries.
one of the companies that he talks about in the book that he owned was they would build the I can't remember what that's called. Um, the berm that the railroad track set on. Crud, I should know what that's called. I grew up next to
The
it.
railroad ties?
Huh?
The railroad ties?
Under the ties, the gravel.
Oh,
What's the word I'm looking for?
I'm not sure.
Me either.
My father would know. I should call him up, but we don't have the time.
Well, believe me, it's a simple word that's just bouncing around in my head and can't find its way out. But anyway, his company would build those for the railroads.
Okay.
And I know where certain ones are that I know his company built. And it's kind of interesting to drive through those areas and look at it and say, well, I'll be damned, Jesse built that.
Anyways, okay.
The
Yeah,
mound that the tracks are built on.
I'm sure we'll figure it out whenever it's not
Yeah.
show 2 hours
I'm
later.
sure there's going to be people out there. It's a such and such, you
It's
idiot.
this idiots. Yeah. So that's so 1900 on. He he moved to Texas, and the KGC, the Confederate Underground. We should cover that because people just cover it directly. So the Confederate Underground and the KGC, the Knights of the Golden Circle, are those synonymous? Are they the same thing or separate entities working towards the same thing?
No, but they did work together. The Confederacy is basically the South. It is the people who are trying to prevent the world bankers from coming into our country and taking control of our monetary system. Those people that finally won the war are the very reason why you will never own a car or a house. And there's people out there saying, I own a car, really? Let me see the title. And
Yeah.
they'll go in and they'll get their certificate of title. But great, you have a certificate of title. Where's the title?
Where's the license to use it? All this
And if
crap.
you ever have a question on whether you own something or not, stop paying the taxes on it.
Yep.
But the real owner will soon show up.
And property tax. Lovely.
It's no different than when we left England in 1776 when we won our independence.
Yes.
That's the slavery that was being created.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there, I got off track there, and now I forgot what the question was.
No, that's okay. I haven't. What were we talking about? The Confederate Underground and the KGC, were they synonymous? Were they working together?
The Confederacy was the entire organization, the South, okay, if you will, Dixie. The organization, KGC, or Knights of the Golden Circle, was one of the organizations within the Confederacy. There were several. But the Knights of the Golden Circle was basically spies, saboteurs, etc. Some of the stories that you'll read in the Black Book are comical, and I don't care whether they're true or not, because I hope they are.
See.
But anyway, I hope that gives you a little better idea.
No, sure, yeah. And Jesse's involvement with the KGC, because the KGC claimed to have stockpiles in underground locations all across the West, and they
Yes, not the East, not the central United States, but all over the West.
All over the West, and that's probably from Missouri, well, Colorado to California.
The book is full of business dealings that took place in New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Washington, Idaho, Montana, California, Nevada.
And on these locations are pretty much generically saying that this is either a stockpile of weapons, money, meeting site, and they were a lot of them were locked and booby trapped, and
I think if the people, the general public, was to be allowed to uncover just one of these sites, I think it would be so overwhelming, they wouldn't know what to do.
Overwhelming with the material they
In
find
in the
inside of it.
things that were in the things that would be found within.
Hmm.
I mean, I know I posted it, and I certainly can't repeat it off the top of my head, but the contents of the what we call the ghost town map.
Contents of the ghost town map.
Yeah, and that is definitely one of the big ones, one of the big depositories. 67 tons of gold supposedly in it. I can't remember how many tons of silver is supposed to be in that. I'm trying to get to it now the slow way.
And this is in one location?
Yes. And when I got the map, I first off thanked my lucky stars, as it at the time was not prevalent on the internet. And can't tell you who it was that gave it to me. Okay. Crud. On that one, I've got it all blurred out. Hey, why don't I just go directly to the file? I mean, this just to give you an idea.
I wonder if any of this had anything to do with. Did Jesse move any of Maximilian's treasure to any of these KGC
He
locations?
most certainly did. Not only Maximilian's treasure, but an Aztec treasure as well.
So you're saying Jesse uncovered ancient Aztec treasure as well, sometime in his life?
Yes, according to the Red Bone Indians down in Mexico that were helping him and communicating with the Aztecs, who were in favor of Maximilian, they told him where one of the Aztec treasures were, and they brought it up into Texas. I'm pretty sure it didn't stay there, but here we go. It's about damn time.
I'm curious, would they have had to bring all that bullion up via mule, or did they have railroad down there?
Do you understand why he was involved in railroads?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I didn't know how much railroads expanded into Mexico at that time.
It basically says that J.W. James used this town as his own bailiwick during bad years. He stored thousands of tons of excess copper bars to help keep the copper prices up to $15 or cents or something. I don't know. Let's see, per pound on the market. He hoped to store copper until the prices increased. Placer gold and gold bars. Let's see, silver bars. Over here it tells you how many. 200 repeating rifles and ammunition. 5 or 6 Gatling guns. That's an interesting notation because of an event that took place not too far from there. And 300 pistols, 10,000 to 12,000 tons of copper bars, 500 to 700 tons of silver bars, 76 tons of placer gold. I think I know where 66 of that came from. Saddles, blankets, canned goods, etc.
What is plaster gold?
I think it's anything from small nuggets down to flour gold.
Okay. Okay, so it's not ingot bars. Okay.
No. Usually in bags.
Now, one thing that you mentioned in that list got my ears perked up. So you mentioned Gatling guns that were used in some type of scenario or incident down there. What was that?
Well, now that you put my feet to the fire.
I mean, you don't have to, but it's really interesting.
No. It's not that, it's old age. The famous Indian battle that took place up there in Montana, South
Oh,
Dakota.
yeah.
Oh,
Custard?
yeah, Custer's Last Stand.
Yep.
I know it's difficult to believe, and I'm not asking anybody to believe me, and I can always be wrong, but Jesse was there.
Leading or fighting?
Helping
What's
the
up?
Indians. The Battle of
Oh,
Little Bighorn.
oh.
And
Hey, I
he
forgot
he
that.
showed
Forgot.
them he showed them how to put Gatling guns on their horses. And when I read that, I almost started laughing, and I thought, well, I need to hold my tongue here for a minute. Went and did a little bit of research on this, and come to find out they were absolutely putting Gatling guns on the back of horses in those days.
Oh, holy shit! Excuse my language. That
Well, I
is
hope
something
they're
else.
really good at shooting between the ears.
Yeah, I'm surprised they were able to keep their horses from not freaking out.
Exactly. I put a few photos of on the blog site with horses with Gatling guns.
Well, which Native American Indian tribes were fighting Custard that battle again?
The Sioux.
This is the Sioux, okay, primarily, and yeah, and he wasn't fighting on the side of the
No,
Europeans and whites.
I
He
think
was fighting.
Jesse and his people pretty much stayed out of it. They just simply armed the Indians, helped them with planning, etc., showed them how to use Gatling guns, whatever. But when it was all over, they had to go gather up all them guns, the pistols, the Gatling guns, etc., and get evidence of it out of there.
I see, and they decimated the white army there. So it gave them the ability to clean up after themselves,
Yeah,
and
and
this was
there are actually some sympathizers of the South that were involved in that, according to the book. And in order for them to get out of it and get out of it safe, they had to, I don't know, they had to hold a certain banner up. I can't remember whether it was a white banner or what color it was, golden banner. And they rode right through the Indians to escape it all. They knew that Custard was not leaving.
ain't that something? Ain't that something? Well, uh, yeah, that and from my this is just a basic Civil War question. There were more Native American Indian tribes that cooperated and fought alongside the Confederacy than there was that fought alongside the North.
Absolutely, especially the ones that knew what was really going on. Why do you think the black soldiers were fighting for the South?
Yeah.
And I heard someone come up with the excuse, oh, that's because they knew that they would gain their freedom afterwards. BS.
Nonsense.
They knew
Nonsense.
what was happening.
Yeah, there were a lot of accounts of blacks who were freed by the North, like Sherman's armies, as they came rummaged and pillaged
They
through the
went
South,
back.
and they ended up fighting and shooting them in the back because they saw the North raping and killing them and treating the slaves, not feeding them, and
And
they.
and I don't know why they made such a big issue out of the South. I'll bet you if you got into some real records, you'd find out that there were as many slaves up north as there was in the South.
Yeah, yeah. The
I mean,
Emancipation
I
Proclamation was just a propaganda piece that was
I
meant to
mean,
show up foreign
it,
countries.
it would have to be something you were raised with because I can't see how anyone could put into slavery any man.
Yeah,
And it wasn't just the African slaves that come over. The Indians have had their fair share of being slaves to the Spanish, and I mean the history of it just goes way
and each
back.
other. Each other, yeah. Humans have been enslaving each other. It's a normal part of humanity. That's once you get past that, it's but not good. Doesn't make it okay by any means. But it's yeah.
Well, for all those people out there listening, you're a slave now. You're in bondage and captivity. And the only reason you don't know it is because they didn't put chains around your wrist and around your ankle.
It's just called a
The
birth certificate and social security number, isn't it?
best, pretty much. The best slave to have is one who doesn't know he's a slave, but you build a fence around him or put chains on him, suddenly he knows it.
Yeah. I remember in your discussion you mentioned just substitute the word federal for foreign, foreign reserve, the foreign bureau of
If you want to
investigation.
understand it, to me, that's the easiest way. Just substitute the word federal with foreign.
Yeah.
I mean, all you got to do is just think about some of the things that you learned. You know, remember when we all place our hand over our heart? Okay. I imagine there's a few Democrats out there, and I couldn't care less. You're more than welcome to believe what you want. But think about how many Democrats actually stood there, held their hand over their heart, and said, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the what?
The republic. Last
You
time I
have any
checked.
idea where that word came from? You think it had anything to do with Republican form of government?
Yep.
A free republic?
Yep. I had to remind my grandparents that we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic, and that kind of left them dumbfounded.
Have you noticed that every time the U.S. goes in to help these poor countries out that are suffering from civil wars and such, when they leave a federal democracy?
It's disgusting.
I'll give you a little clue. It means they took over their fiat system.
Yep. Yep. And it wasn't but 40 years after 40 or 50 years after our revolution that a central bank was installed. But I don't want to get too. I don't want us to get too off track. It's okay. That's okay. That's okay. But getting back a little bit to just a few questions here that I have on this note. So the KGC and Confederate Underground, when do you think it kind of went away? Because it can't be still a viable entity today.
Oh, God. You know, I used to think the same thing.
Really?
I don't think it's an up and running organization as it was. In fact, I would say it probably pretty much died out in the 20s to 30s. Okay. I believe that the organization itself is still organized. But to what degree, we just don't know. I can't even hint around about what I stumbled across, and it could be coincidence. Except I don't believe in coincidences. But if I'm right, I can trace it right back to Knights Templars. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Knights of Golden Circle have anything to do with Knights Templars, but I would also believe that there is a surviving organization of Knights Templars as well.
I see. Okay. And so that pretty much died out in the 20s, you say, as what we used to know the KGC and Confederate Underground is what it was. Let me ask you something I wanted to ask you before I forget. Alan or Mr. Trammell, John Trammell, Jesse's longtime, almost lifelong friend. Can you say? Can you go
Pretty
into
close.
a little bit more description about him and how he identified?
I think
Jesse's...
when John broke away and escaped from whoever supposedly owned him, I think he was around 16 years old, but he was one big kid.
Yeah.
By the time Jesse got him, he was probably up around 18, I would guess. And I don't mean bought him. I mean, Jesse took him in, and he immediately went to work for the organization.
I see. Okay. And it wasn't almost like a Tom Sawyer incident story where they just ran into each other.
Well, here's one of the top individuals in the Civil War, considering what the Civil War was really all about.
Yeah.
or what everybody thinks it was, who takes in an escaped slave.
Who
He was
fights
a
himself.
Southern man who took in an escaped slave.
Yeah.
Boy, it's such a terrible thing to do.
Yep. And this
See, nothing makes sense.
nothing makes sense if you accept the public school narrative.
Yeah.
Definitely. And he was there on and off. He sometimes didn't see Jesse James for several years at a time because of Jesse's occupation and his jobs across the West. But ultimately on Jesse's deathbed, he was there to identify and confirm that this is the real Jesse James, right?
Yeah, and it really wasn't until after the Civil War that John Trammell started venturing off on his own, doing his own thing. But during the Civil War, they were two peas in a pod.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't count how many times John probably saved Jesse's butt and vice versa.
Yeah. So, and then Trammell identified Jesse on his deathbed,
Yes.
and we've even seen. See, what was the alias Jesse was going under when he was on the film on film?
Actually, you said Trammell identified him on his deathbed. Gotcha. All right. I was thinking at the first time he was killed.
But but Trammell was there in the 1951 to identify him. And what alias was Jesse James going under when he was on the big screen in that footage?
J. Frank Dalton was the last alias that he was using. He was using the name of someone whom he knew quite well, who was actually killed long before. We do have a history about the actual J. Frank Dalton who was killed, and he assumed his name.
Okay. The final chapter of Jesse's life.
Yeah, I always found that photo to be quite humorous. We got J. Frank Dalton standing there with three black guys that fought with Jesse in the war, identifying and saying, "This is Jesse James." I mean, if J. Frank Dalton wasn't Jesse James, then why were they standing there? They would have said, "No, this man's a fraud. We knew Jesse James." But that's not how it went down.
Yep. And something about if people ever go up to St. Joseph and bored, they could go look for the St. Joseph bricks that Mr. Trammell made. You want to get a little bit of those?
Yeah.
What were those all about?
I'm not quite sure, but I think John got a little idea in his head, and he thought, we ought to make some bricks and write on the bricks the evidence that this whole thing actually occurred. And we'll bury him here, and someday they'll find him. But boy, don't tell Jesse. Jesse'd probably be mad.
Let's see.
And I think it was Lee Hawk that once he heard that story, he went looking for him, and he found a few of them.
Yeah. When did Lee Hawk pass away?
That's a good question. I'm not rightly sure.
Dang. Okay. Well, I see that we're at a little over an hour and a quarter here. Once again, let's tell people about your website and where they could find you and reach out to you or donate to you if they want. And you want to tell everyone where they could find you at?
Well, the best place is to go to the blog site, www.tuscoro.com, and that's TUSCORO.com. My true love is Native American petroglyphs. I've been studying the meaning of glyphs for about 35 years. I've found some pretty incredible things that most people don't even know exist, simply by following the directions that are carved upon the rocks. That's kind of what led me into this and into Okay, I admit it. Spanish treasure hunting. I have had some pretty incredible documents sent to me over the years. Some of the most incredible are actually down in Mexico. But I would invite anybody to come to the blog. If you can donate, great. Would love it. I've been through a lot of crap in the last 16 years that we will not go into here. And it's put me in a position where there's not much more I can do than the research and bid roofs for roofing contractors.
I see. Okay. Okay. But yeah, like he said, Tuscoro.com. If you guys want to get in contact, check out the blog. Very interesting stuff. And we'll have you. I definitely want to have you on again. I hope to have you on anyways. And we're going to cover some.
By the way, when you get to the main page of the blog, if you're on your phone, I can't tell you where to find it, but unless you switch it to a desktop view. But if you're on a computer, the top left, there's a menu right under, and you'll see a search function. Down below that, you'll see books for sale.
Oh, great. Yes. Yeah,
that's one way to help me out and get something is buy a book, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I plan on getting one or two of your books. The Treasures of Utah one. There's out of these 5 here. I definitely want to get one or two. But including the black book. The black book, of course, it's a republished version for 2020 that you have on your website, which you did not write, but you are making it a lot cheaper and affordable for people to get.
Right. I've got 4 or 5 books in there that we did the same thing. We republished them just because they were a hard to find book and very sought after, whether it's a treasure story or signs and symbols, treasure signs and symbols, that kind of thing. And I just barely put up 2 more volumes of Tuscoro.com's articles, and I'm still working on volume 6.
Right.
And
great.
I'll probably stop there. If I don't, I think I'm going to have my wife stop me.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. And well, that was great. Well, I have to say thank you for coming on for this discussion. It's been a real joy having you on, and it went really well. I think people are really going to appreciate this. And thank you very much, Mr. Lowe. Until next time.
You got to send me a copy, right?
Oh yeah, I'll send you a link as to a link and a physical copy if you want, and I'll show you exactly where to find it.
Thank you much.
No problem. And
have a great day.
You too.
Bye.